The second Yama we'll take a look at is the concept of Satya. Satya is defined as non-lying or truthfulness. And Satya includes being truthful in our speech and our actions with others, as well as within ourselves. And this is where, to me, Satya is such a profound and interesting concept that has so much impact. So Satya means expressing and being in harmony with pure truth and living core values. The authenticity that we feel in the heart space, or sometimes the core values that are felt in the gut, are sort of an indicator for when Satya can be in balance. Now, considering the context of the Yoga Sutras and the 8 limbs of yoga, with that intention of creating an environment of peace, harmony, and eventually stillness, creating an inner landscape that is actually truthful with what's in our heart is an enormous factor in creating peace and harmony. One of my favorite commentators about the yamas and niyamas is a lady named Deborah Adele. I always recommend this book that she wrote on the yamas and niyamas, and I'll recommend it to you if you're interested in learning more. But one quote I wanted to share here is, "Living the life that cries to be lived from the depth of our being frees up our energy and vitality. We benefit and everyone around us benefits." Now, moving on, in considering the concept of truth and the concept of truthfulness, it's perhaps worth considering the question of whether there is one absolute truth, or if the concept of truth is one that is more just deeply personal. The concept of truth can come up in interesting ways in the context of relationships. An example I like to think about is an example of politics. What might be the truth for one person who's voting for a particular candidate might be very different from the truth of another person with a different candidate. So as we consider the concept of Satya in relationships, I wanted to show a few examples of how the truth can manifest within a few different types of relationships. Now, starting with a relationship type that is codependent. Codependence assumes that the identity is defined within the context of relationship. And this can lead to a perception of there being a singular truth, often leading to a bit of a push and pull dynamic. Contrasting this with a relationship type that is completely independent, where two individuals are completely separate, living their own truth and expressing their own truth, those two truths might go in completely different directions. That truth might be authentic for each individual, and the truths aren't necessarily parallel. And the third type of relationship is one of interdependence, where two people are directly connected and yet completely sovereign, each expressing their own personal truth, and ideally those truths moving kind of forward in parallel, even if there are some oscillations along the way. Well, there's so many examples to consider with Satya, and it implies a level of integrity with the way that we behave in private is consistent with the way that we behave in public and vice versa. But there are a range of factors that come up in life that can kind of require us to take a second look or to examine whether things are still part of our truth. So a few more examples of finding truth and authenticity begins with this question. Am I living and expressing my personal truth within this current lifestyle that I'm in at the moment? Am I living and expressing my personal truth with my existing patterns or habits? Perhaps a certain pattern or habit from the past is no longer serving today. Likewise, you can look at this through existing beliefs and value systems. From time to time, we have to take a look at if certain beliefs and certain values are still serving, or perhaps those are remnants from the past or remnants from a certain pattern or habit. Sometimes we have to sort of clean the lens of our glasses, or in other cases, get brand new glasses with a new prescription. Another one that can come up commonly is whether I'm living and expressing my personal truth in this job or career. Sometimes finding truth requires radical change, and it can be quite scary. It's where I mentioned earlier how Satya can be quite confronting. Likewise, it comes up within relationships. In some cases, perhaps a friendship is outgrown, or in intimate interpersonal relationships. In considering the first Yama of ahimsa, sometimes in order to practice ahimsa and nonviolence requires finding truth and finding Satya that can sometimes be difficult and uncomfortable. And lastly, coming back to the concept of, am I living and expressing my personal truth with what is in my heart? That felt sense of truth. I want to leave you with a quote from Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss says, "Be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind."